Can you see the difference between these two seedlings? There is a difference. And the interesting thing is, this one was actually started 10 days before this one. You can see this one has caught up, and it has nice, healthy, dark green growth. So what's the difference? Well, I'm going to tell you, and we're going to talk about the recipe. Let's go. Hey guys, it's Bree here from Blossom and Branch Farm, and today I'm going to be giving you my promised new soil block recipe we developed this year in 2023. This has been a process. Now, when we first started our soil blocking journey 4 years ago, we started with a brand of compost called 4V Compost. Now, we learned that they actually don't have a peat-free blend. So while that blend worked really well, it contained peat, which is largely unsustainable when we're talking about the fact that it releases carbon during its harvest, it decimates ecosystems. It's just not the best resource to be using for seed starting, and there's other great alternatives that we're going to talk about today. So the first one that we actually tried was coconut coir. So coconut coir comes in bricks that look like this. It's often been compressed, you hydrate it, it fluffs up, and then you can use it as a binder similar to peat moss. Coconut coir is a great alternative because it's really widely available. The problem with coconut coir is that there's a lot of concerns with labor considerations. So for us, we're in Colorado, coconut coir comes a very long way. It's not exactly a local product, and it also takes a lot of water to get it to a point where it's usable in gardening and seed starting, because otherwise it can be really salty. So downsides of coconut coir. Now there are also other products like Pitt Moss. We have another soil blocking recipe using Pitt Moss, which is a recycled paper product, which is a great option. However, we're still not clear on PFAS considerations. Pitt Moss has conducted testing on one of their products. It's been proven to be PFAS free, but that's not the product that we were using that they tested. So anyway, unclear on whether or not the Pitt Moss and recycled paper contains PFAS forever chemicals or not. Some people will say there's already PFAS everywhere, so it doesn't matter. For me in my garden, I don't want to use PFAS because I don't want to risk compounding a PFAS issue. The more PFAS in your soil, the more your plants take up, the more it ends up in your food and in your body. So to me, I just don't want to be compounding that issue. So we've tried the Pitt Moss. I did like it. It actually holds and retains quite a bit of moisture, which can be good or bad. It depends on the seed. Now, some seeds that like a little bit drier conditions, for example, our Lysianthus, didn't really like the Pitt Moss because it stayed too moist. It held water too well. And we do test all of these recipes extensively. This one was using leaf mold that we used out of the Lomi. So we filled up our Lomi composter with just straight leaves. The product that came out of that on the eco cycle gave us this kind of peat mossy-ish texture. And so we mixed that with our soil, and we tested that one. We are using the same base soil to mix in with all of these, so there's consistency there. And the leaf mold did okay, not great. Now, when we're looking at the leaf mold versus our new recipe, there's definitely a difference in the health of the seedling itself. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, is what is the recipe that we used to give this nice green growth. The favorite product of the year that I've stumbled upon is wool pellets. Now, I knew when we got our sheep that this was something that I wanted to look into, is can we use their wool in any way or form in the garden, and can we use it in a way with seed starting? So wool pellets are great because they retain a lot of moisture and they're a very readily available source. So some of the benefits of wool are that they have great water retention. They're also a very slow release nitrogen. So when we're looking at the NPK of wool pellets, it's mostly an N. So that's great in a garden like mine that has high phosphorus levels, to use something that doesn't have phosphorus in it. Now, you can use this recipe for soil blocking, or you can use it in a tray. It will work either way. Now, if you are looking at your wool pellets, when you get them, they will be pelletized, so they'll be in a pelletized form. So we need to hydrate them so that they're gonna mix in well with the rest of our ingredients. I'm gonna start with 1 part of my sheep wool pellets. Here we have 1 mason jar full. I'm going to pop it into my little bucket here, and I'm going to mix it with water. Now, it does just have this in mind that it does smell a little bit like wet sweater. So wool pellets, they may smell more or less sheepy. They have a little bit of a manure scent to them. So just a heads up if that's something that concerns you. I'm going to mix this water in with my pellets. I'm using hot water just to help speed up the process a little bit. And we're going to let this sit for a few minutes. And today I'm going to be demonstrating with all three of the soil blockers. So if you're not sure which soil blocker to use, if you're just getting into soil blocking, we have another video about which size to use. But for today I'm going to try all three just so that we have a good basis of baseline that this recipe will work for whichever size blocker you're using. So it's been a few minutes. You can see that our wool pellets are kind of turning into this little bit of a slushy, slurry texture. So once we have these wool pellets rehydrated, we're going to add our soil. Now the soil that I'm using is Coco Loco. It's the same soil that I always use for my soil blocking. People often ask why I use Coco Loco. It's from Fox Farms. I just use it because it's the only peat-free potting mix that I can find in my area without having to ship something in. So there's really not a lot out there yet in terms of peat-free options here in the US. And so it was that one. We also tried another one called Beyond Peat. I didn't really like that one very much. I much prefer the Coco Loco version. I've sifted it. So remember over in our other soil blocking video, we talk about sifting. Now, if you're going to be using this for soil blocks, you'll definitely want to sift. If you're going to be putting it into trays, you don't have to sift this out. I'm going to measure out 4 parts of the sifted Coco Loco soil. Now I'm going to mix in 4 cups, 4 parts of this. And remember, a part is a part, okay? So if you want to make a huge batch of this and measure it in 5-gallon buckets, that's totally fine and doable. Make as much as you need on that given day. I don't like to make it in advance and let it sit wet, just because that can be a breeding ground for fungus gnats. So I just like to mix up whatever I need that day. All right, so this is it. Unlike our other recipes, we're not putting green sand in here. We're not putting anything else. All we have is our Coco Loco and our wool pellets. Let's mix it together. So I'm making sure to mix it really, really well because we want the wool to be evenly distributed throughout the soil. So I'm mixing it dry before I add in my water. You could also add a dash of cinnamon in at this point, especially if the smell of the wool bothers you. Feel free to add in some cinnamon for that little bit of antifungal, and also because it smells like Christmas. All right, let's add our water. I'm gonna measure it out. I'm using hot water. That always seems to work the best for me. Remember, it's always best to start with less water and work your way up because it's easy to add water. It's hard to remove water. Okay, this is looking pretty good. So that was about just over 1 full part of water. Remember, I started with 1 part water with 1 part wool pellets. Then I added in 4 parts soil and then 1 more part of water. If you need to add more or less, depending on your climate, depending on how moist your soil was to begin with, remember there's always a little bit of flexibility with how much water you're adding. All right, this looks pretty well incorporated. Let's do a test pressing out the various blocks so we know I'm not full of it. Just to make sure that wool is incorporated throughout. We want those binding properties of the wool as well as that little bit of nitrogen from the wool. We want all that good stuff in every little block, and we don't want it all in one block. All right, let's start with the hardest one, which is the mini block. This makes 20 of the 3/4 inch blocks, and this one tends to be the most finicky. So when we're looking at blocking recipes in particular, usually it's harder to get one that will work for the minis, just because it's the most finicky blocker to use. All right, here's test number 1 with the minis. Looks pretty good to me. So you can actually see a little bit of the wool fiber in the block itself. So our next size up is the medium 5 blocker. Okay, so 5 blocker with the wool pellets. Nice block, nice clean edges on these blocks, and that's something I always look for. And you can pick it up easily, holds together quite well. Last up, we'll try the big guy with the inserts. So as you can see, it works well for all sizes. The larges the mediums, and the smalls. So the water quantities that I just gave you were for making soil blocks. So remember that if you are just doing seed starting in a regular tray, if you make it as wet as you would for soil blocking, that's too wet for a tray. That's the water quantity for soil blocking only. Trays use less water. Now, all of our soil blocking recipes have had extensive testing. We've published a few. Any of these are great alternatives to peat. Again, the goal is get away from peat. The sheep's wool, I have been very, very happy with the performance of those seedlings. Like I mentioned, this seedling that you see here on the far end and this seedling that you see here, this one was sown 10 days after this one. It's caught up in size. It is a much darker, healthier green. So I am attributing that to those wool pellets because they were from the same seed packet, same supplier. Everything else has been the same. Now this variety was grown in the Pitt Moss. Another good alternative. We're still waiting to hear more about the PFAS issue from them, so stay tuned, we'll update when we can. There's no one right answer. It's what's right for you, what is most available to you. Now, of course, we have the sheep and we're really trying to make sure that we close that loop of what we're having to bring in terms of materials and amendments and things to the farm. So using what we have sheep, we're going to use their wool pellets. That is a great option for us. All right, guys, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you learned something. Again, the point is just find what's going to work for you. Depending on where you are, depending on what you have access to, one or none of these options might work for you. And we're going to keep looking into different options as well. We hope we'll see you back here in the greenhouse and garden soon.